So everybody, today let us talk about power cables. Now before we get into it, I want to state that I have heard a difference over the years that power cables make. Whether that's bias or not. You know, honestly, I think bias gets a bad rap because people will reference that as, okay, then it's not true. But, you know, honestly, you know, our perception sort of determines our reality. So if I spend, you know, $500 on a power cable and I believe it makes a difference and I hear a difference, even if it is bias, then what difference does it make? Why criticize that? Why criticize somebody for being happy with their system or being happier with their system? You know what I mean? It's just sort of a silly premise in my opinion. So we've got a few cables, kind of break it down. I dropped one here actually. There we go. Anyway, we've got the PS Audio Perfect Wave AC5. Let me see if I can show you that there. Yeah, the Perfect Wave, the good old PS Audio. Very nicely made. I want to say these are around $300 or $400. I didn't pay that for it. You can actually pick them up on the used market for $100, a couple $100 somewhere in there. But very lovely power cables, extremely nice construction. They're actually so nice construction that they can be difficult to work with. For example, if at the IEC end, let's say your amp is orientated this way and you've got to flip this thing around, it's actually quite difficult to do. It's quite a stiff cable and it can actually make it difficult to work with. But yeah, very, very lovely construction. Like I said, I want to say $300 or $400 for one of these. And then, of course, we also have a good old power cable, something that's thrown in on a box. You know, they just toss this in when you buy an amp or a CD player or a DAC or something. This is what they give you. But anyway, we also have the two Hi-Fi audio cables. Now, these are the newest ones they've come out with. Of course, we've got, let me get the boxes here. I got the boxes. We've got the Quasar, okay? And that retails, I want to say for right at $5. It might be $6, but I'm pretty sure it's $5. And then, as the fancier step-up model, we've got the Supa Quasar. And this goes for right at $900, maybe right at $1,000. Now, I did receive these from Hi-Fi Audio for review and to kind of share my thoughts. And I thought since I've had so much high-end gear over the past couple of months, you know, I would kind of use these cables and sort of share my thoughts and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, let's talk about it. So first and foremost, I do think overall with the Hi-Fi Audio power cables, they are very, very nicely made. Of course, they are expensive cables, but the quality of the construction, very nice. I believe they're about 2 meters roughly, or maybe 1 3/4 meters. So quite a good length. Very, very nicely made. The basic Quasar has sort of a passive noise reduction technique. It's related to the way that the copper is wound inside in terms of the grounding scheme. Effectively, I think what they do with it is the grounding connection is centralized, where the power, where the positive and neutral conductors wrap around it. But the ground is centered all the way through from one end to the other. And of course, the Supa Quasar is the same design with the exception, of course, of this black tube on the cable. And it got a little dirty from being in my rack. Actually, I need to clean it up. Sorry. But it does have some indicators when you plug it in that light up polarity and whether or not it's grounded properly. And same length, quite a bit heavier though. This is a heavy cable. All these ferrules and things like that, and of course the plugs themselves, they are metal construction. This thing probably weighs about a good 2 pounds. Because of this thing's, the active noise box, it's probably about a 5-pound cable. It's quite heavy. And that leads me on to my only criticism with the Hi-Fi audio cables is the amp end, the IEC end jack. Regardless of whatever I've used them on over the past couple of months, whether that be the high-end Macintosh I took a look at, the Bryston stuff, you know, the audio research stuff, even my basic, like my Rega IO, you know, I have a Yamaha RN800. Regardless, the amp end on both the Supa Quasar and the Quasar, it fits a little loose. I've also had it on CD players, DACs, I mean, you name it. I've tried it. It just fits a little loose. And with this being a heavyweight cable, particularly the Supa Quasar, it can kind of pull out unless you keep an eye on it. Now, converse that with something like the Perfect Wave AC5. This thing fits snug. Matter of fact, when you've got it in, you feel like, if you want to try to get it out, it's quite difficult to get it out. Of course, conversely, a regular power cable will fit standard. I mean, it fits well enough. It's not super snug, but it's not loose either. It just is just right, kind of Goldilocks type thing. But yeah, that's my only criticism with these iFi Audio, the newer Quasar and the Supa Quasar power cables, is just that fitment on the IEC connector. It just feels just a hair loose. But overall, the construction, the build quality is absolutely superlative. Considering the cost of these things, as I said, this is $900, and I want it, like I said, with the Quasar, I think it's $500 or $600 for that. Of course, American bucks. But construction is overall fantastic. So, as I said before, I don't necessarily buy into the whole bias thing, and I also don't buy into it from the aspect of why the criticism. If you spend $900, you plug this into your $10,000 amplifiers, and you hear a difference, then what does it matter if it's your mind making it up or you making believe that it works? You know what I'm saying? What difference does it make? You spent money, you got an improvement, so yeah, right? But in any case, I am a believer in power cables. I've had quite a lot over the years. I've had AudioQuest, I've had Kimber cables, I've had a couple Nordost as well. I've had, excuse me, I'm sorry, Jesus. Oh. Anyway, I've had Nordost, I've had, what's the one company? Isotech, I've had Isotech. I haven't had Shunyatas yet. But I've always heard, Shunyata is one of those companies that people either really love it and they say, God, it's the best thing ever, or they don't. You know what I mean? So it seems like the don't proponents have had a louder voice as I've understood it. So I've kind of shied away from Shunyata. But in any case, all of the iFi Audio products, their power products, I tried the iFi Power Station. Actually, I'm going to get one here in a couple of weeks. I love that thing. I absolutely love that thing. And all their power cables I've tried over the years have been absolutely phenomenal. And these are no exception. And so, yeah, let's do comparison real quick. So, what do we got? So, of course, we got the Supa Quasar, as I said. We also have the Quasar, and, of course, the Perfect Wave AC5. And the regular good old power cable, right? The good old throw-in, right? So what do I hear as a difference? Now, the newest auditory memory item where I've been using these, I've got a vintage amp I've got plugged in right now, so of course you can't use these, but the newest thing is off my Rega IO, which I'm actually, if you see me looking, I got it on top of my fridge right now. But yeah, my Rega IO, I was trying these out, and I was going to do a video, what is it like using a $900 power cable on a $700 amp? But I decided not to. I might ruffle too many feathers with that. But anyway, what do I hear? So a regular power cable, it sounds fine. It sounds how you might think, right? Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention up until now, all of these are tests are being done running into my AudioQuest Niagara 1000. I picked that up maybe about 4 months ago, maybe a little bit longer. I had been using an older Panamax, but I decided to get the AudioQuest because I got a great deal on it secondhand. And it was kind of like, well, it wasn't secondhand, it was kind of more like a dealer demo type thing. And, even though it's an older model, it's still absolutely fantastic. But yeah, so you standard, right? You don't really notice anything. It just sounds how it sounds. And so you change the power cables and you go to something like the PS Audio, this is the Perfect Wave AC5. And, to be honest with you, I didn't really notice a huge difference using the AC5 versus the regular throw-in. Not really. I do think maybe a hair smoother, like, things like transients and maybe background noise was just ever so slightly lessened, but not dramatic and not enough to say that man, this thing is worth the money, or, you know, whatever. But I will add real quick that power cables can be system dependent and obviously power dependent. Perhaps somebody else using this in another system would, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. You know, my system sounded like absolute dog turds, but when I put this in, man, it just took it over the top, right? But in any case, I didn't hear much of a difference in my system with this versus this. And that isn't just with the Rega IO, but also with the Macintosh, the Bryston stuff, the audio research stuff, all of it, I didn't really hear much of a difference. All right, now when I switch to the Quasar, which is the less, let me get a, yeah, here we go, is the less expensive Hi-Fi audio cable. What do I hear here? Well, kind of a reduction of noise. And I think Hi-Fi audio is onto something with their concept or theory of reducing noise in a system in this active noise cancellation. And let me see on the box, it actually describes it. It uses their zero ground design to create a central core free of any magnetic field. Combined with the shotgun ground, meaning it just runs straight through, as I said, it uses a non-twisting constant impedance. The cable achieves perfect protection from magnetic fields and any nil induction voltage. And it says the result is vastly reduced system noise. And, you know, honestly, I would agree with that. I think you do notice a reduction in noise here. And, you know, as I talked about before, I mentioned briefly the Hi-Fi power station, and I did a review on that. I'll link down below. That was the hugest thing I noticed with that device, is plugging anything into it. You felt like you got this huge sense of reduction of background noise. Think of it like the color black. You know, black is pretty black, right? You know, here's something that's black. All right, it's pretty black, but you can always have blacker, right? You know, think of looking at a sheet of paper where somebody colored it kind of with black crayon lightly, and it's black. But then you had somebody come along and they colored the same thing, but they did it really hard, and then it's super black. And that's kind of the aspect here. That's what I notice with the Quasar. I notice a reduction in background noise. It results in a reduction of background noise, but it results in a blacker background. You feel like more of the music is coming through and less of the noise, that type of thing. Now, that leads me in, of course, to the Supa Quasar. And what do I think of the Supa Quasar? Well, I think it ups that, but it ups it quite a bit. Actually, surprisingly so. I was surprised by the extent at which the Supa Quasar increases that effect more so than the Quasar. Not that the Quasar is bad, but if we talk about that reducing background noise, having a blacker system, and let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, you know, this is a 3, this is maybe a 4.5, and let's say this is a 6. So you would think, well, this is going to be an 8. No, this was a 27. Okay, this thing really took the noise down quite a bit. Of course, it is an expensive cable. However, there is one negative side effect to this. When using my Rega IO, specifically the IO, I only noticed it with the IO, using this, I did notice a reduction in dynamics. Of course, Rega amplifiers, you know, much like name amplifiers, tend to be very renowned for their dynamic, rhythmic capability and making music, you know, really want to bounce along and all this kind of stuff. And that's true. But when I inserted the Supa Quasar, only the Supa Quasar, not the Quasar, not the AC5, and certainly not the regular, only this one, I noticed a pullback of that dynamic reach a little bit. That efficacy, that effervescent quality was reduced. You know, it went down, you know, on a Rega amp, it's always at a 10. It went down to about a 7 with this, and I'm not sure why. It could have something to do with the active system, or it could just be, as I mentioned before, that power cables are system dependent, and for whatever reason, the IO just did not like this, the Supa Quasar. But yeah, so as I said before, you know, I did receive these from Hi-Fi Audio to review, and honestly, do I recommend them? I think the answer to that question is yes. I think I recommend them from the respect of having an expensive system. As I recently reviewed a lot of expensive components, I used these in those systems. And, you know, I found they did make a significant difference. They did reduce the background noise even further than what it already was. And the most important thing to me with any power product is they didn't create a detriment to the sound. You know, I really truly loathe, and I could name brands of products I've used where they're supposed makes a difference, but it actually, or a better, but it made it worse. And these don't definitely do that. I did notice a benefit, but I didn't notice a detraction either. They definitely did their job and did it well. But again, only I think in the context of everything, of an expensive system, of course, everything being price appropriate. Obviously, you wouldn't, hook up a $1,000 power cable to, you know, a $300 amp. That doesn't make any sense. Is it going to make a difference? It might, but, you know, it's kind of like, you know, having the cheapest car you can buy and then putting, you know, $600 tires on it, or, you know, per tire, you know, tires on it. And, you know, yeah, you can do it and it's going to work, obviously, but it's just not worth it. You might as well go buy the $50 tires at, you know, at Walmart or Tire Rack or wherever. But yeah, definitely worth it if you've got you know, a nice system. They do work very well. And yeah, that's all I can really say about them. Like I said, I do recommend them. I've got a few other reviews coming up soon. Got some neat stuff. I'm going to be reviewing the Yamaha RN800A. Seems to be one that kind of flew under the radar for a lot of people. There's not much on YouTube about it, so I'm excited about that. It's an amp I had before that I accidentally destroyed, and I talked about it in a video maybe a month or so ago. I mentioned it casually, but I wanted to review it again, so I bought it again. And anyway, we'll be doing that soon. So anyway, stay tuned and peace out.